Monday, 5:48 a.m. The early spring wind swept across the vast parking lot of the Atlantic Field Terminal headquarters like a harsh greeting. Light from the high-mounted halogen lamps spilled onto the gray concrete, casting long, smeared shadows like old ink stains no one bothered to clean. A faded olive-green pickup truck slowly pulled up to the curb near the back gate. The door opened and a man stepped out, tall and slender, with slightly uneven shoulders and a back that looked like it had survived a serious injury. He wore an old baseball cap with frayed fabric at the brim, his face tilted downward. On the collar of his jacket was a plastic badge that read, Temp Staff, Lawrence M. He said nothing to the security guard who was yawning inside the booth, just gave a slight nod, like an old habit. The guard raised an eyebrow, watching him walk toward the side entrance, and let out a snort, not exactly derisive, but clearly devoid of welcome. In the massive world of logistics, where everything was measured in hours, pallets, and order counts, a newcomer, especially one old and working in janitorial services, simply wasn't worth remembering, especially not here, Clean Zone, the central coordination hub, and also the most notoriously cold and mechanical division in the entire Atlantic system. Lawrence walked through the wide corridors leading to the logistics bay, where containers were stacked like steel walls. Each step echoed faintly with the crunch of lingering dust. The floors, though mopped daily, held a persistent damp film, like the imprint of nonstop shifts that never caught a break. He paused before the equipment room, slowly swiped his worn keycard once. The light blinked red, then green. The door opened, releasing the familiar scent of bleach and rusted metal, like a reminder of the lowest tier in the entire system. Carefully, he rolled out a janitor cart, a mop bucket, a few industrial brooms, a frayed mop head, and a pouch of hand tools. No one greeted him. No one offered an introduction. No orientation session. No directional signage. Only a paper calendar taped loosely to the wall. This week, main hall, storage wing, corridor D4. No signature. No name assigning the task, as if his presence was just an accidental smudge on the scheduling board. 7 a.m. Teams of employees began flooding in, wearing Navy Atlantic uniforms, masks pulled down beneath their chins, barcode scanners or inventory devices in hand. They passed by him like walking past a pillar. Not a single greeting, not a single glance. As Lawrence bent down to scrub the bottom edge of the warehouse door, where grease from forklifts often left smeared black streaks, a pair of polished shoes stopped inches from his head. A man's voice, cold as steel. Hurry it up. The audit team's walking through here at 9. I don't want a single smudge catching their eye. Lawrence didn't look up. He simply rotated his wrist slightly, continuing to scrub with the old rag. The shoes walked away, leaving behind a grumble. Damn it! They'll hire anyone these days. Cutting the budget like this is just... From another corner of the hallway, Harper was checking his barcode scanner and quietly witnessed the entire scene. A young man in his 20s, slightly curly hair, sharp but warm eyes. He'd been working here for almost 2 years, one of the few not yet numbed by Clean Zone's indifferent rhythm. He walked over just as Lawrence stood up, rubbing a knee that seemed to ache after crouching for too long. You okay? Looks like your left knee's giving you trouble. Lawrence gave a small nod, slightly surprised. Harper extended a hand. I'm Harper. If you need directions to the trickier spots, like the tech sublevels or Waste Zone 2, just ask me. Lawrence shook his hand, gave a light squeeze, then said simply, Thanks. Noon. Lawrence ate cold rice in the temporary staff break room, a windowless space with 2 chipped wooden tables and a vending machine that always jammed. As he was eating, a group of 3 entered. 2 men, 1 woman, chatting animatedly until they saw him sitting there. They looked him over from head to toe, and one burst into laughter. Who let Santa Claus in here? All 3 cracked up, then walked out. Lawrence continued eating, his expression unchanged, but his hand froze for just 1 second. 1 second long enough for the audience to feel it. He wasn't swallowing food in that moment. He was swallowing patience. A kind of patience no one should ever have to endure just because they're old. Afternoon. While cleaning the glass along the technical hallway, Lawrence overheard a female employee on the phone. No, baby. Mommy can't pick you up early. No, I'm still on shift. No, I can't. I'm sorry, baby. I'm so sorry. Her voice cracked, then came soft sobbing. Lawrence didn't step forward. He simply reached into his pocket, pulled out a tissue, and placed it on the tray beside the vending machine she would walk past. No words, no interference. Just a quiet gesture from someone who had seen too many tears drown beneath performance metrics. End of shift. Lawrence noted his schedule for the next day, cleaned up the equipment, and dried the break room floor one last time. As he switched off the lights, footsteps echoed behind him. Harper. He handed Lawrence an unofficial floor plan of the sublevels, the ones not marked on any internal maps. This is the old escape hatch. This one's the overflow septic, and that spot over there. That's where the AC always leaks. No one's going to tell you these. Lawrence took it in silence. Harper looked at him, then asked, I'm not sure if you'd want to answer this, but where'd you used to work? Lawrence gave a faint smile. A place that once believed every person deserved to be remembered by name. Harper chuckled. And now? Now I'm somewhere that treats me like an object. Harper didn't know what to say, but his gaze softened. Then he said quietly, I'll remember your name. The back door closed. The hallway lights dimmed. Lawrence walked out to the lot, pulled his old cap back on. Along the way, he stopped before a large window overlooking the conference room, where tomorrow's audit team briefing would be held. He saw the brilliant lights, the logistics models on the table, market maps pinned to the walls. Not a single person in that room knew the man who had just mopped their floor was the same man who once laid the first brick of that building. Clean Zone didn't have an official nameplate, no signage, no motivational slogans like, Together we deliver, or People are our priority hanging on the walls like in the main office areas. The people who worked here didn't call it Clean Zone because it was clean, but because everything here was cold, soulless, and scrubbed away daily, both literally and metaphorically. This was the lowest floor in the structure of Atlantic Field Terminal, but it functioned like a secondary brain, controlling every shipment, every inventory log, every human action through streams of data. Lawrence began his new shift at 6 a.m., as per the paper schedule taped to the wall. Today, he was assigned to the secondary storage zone, an area for perishable goods that required rapid turnover. It was known among staff as the dead zone because the pace was too fast and the machines broke down constantly. He pushed his cart into Zone A3, where the floor was slick from cold water leaking out of a small freezer tank. No one had fixed it. Lawrence looked up at the piping system overhead. He immediately spotted a hairline crack that was causing condensation to drip by the minute. A true operations engineer wouldn't have let it go on for more than 3 days. Here, it had been leaking for over a month. No one in the storage area looked at him. They were too busy, eyes glued to scanners, hands pushing pallets, ears plugged into headsets constantly announcing error codes. Lawrence weaved through the narrow aisle, stopping near a frozen goods unit, pausing when he saw a young employee bent over beside a broken crate. The kid couldn't speak, but his face showed clear panic. Inside the crate were hundreds of thawed food packets, leaking and reeking. He tried to wipe it up, but the more he wiped, the worse the smell got. Lawrence didn't ask anything. He opened his tool pouch, pulled out industrial-grade gloves, and handed them over. The kid looked surprised, then took them with shaky hands and nodded. The two of them cleaned up the mess without saying a word. When they were done, the boy stood still, looking at Lawrence for a moment, then whispered, "Thank you. You're the first," and hurried away as if afraid of being seen. Around 9 a.m., Lawrence moved to quarter D4, the hallway leading to the document storage and internal surveillance control rooms. While scrubbing the grime along the baseboards, two mid-level managers walked by, one named Damien, the assistant head of technical operations, and the other Katya, regional HR supervisor. Damien glanced at Lawrence, then joked, "I thought Atlantic phased out humanitarian policies. How come we're still hiring grandpas?" Katya chuckled softly and replied, "Maybe he's the last relic of that policy." They kept walking, never looking back. Lawrence didn't react. He kept scrubbing, but the sound of the rag on the floor suddenly became sharper, as if his silence had gained weight. At lunch, Lawrence ate in the sub-level break area, a place with nothing more than an old mattress leaning against the wall and a rusted refrigerator labeled, "For personal food only, not liable for lost items." As he opened his lunchbox, a boy around 18 stormed in, threw his lunch bag on the table, panting. "Damn, they kept me going straight into lunch break." He glanced at Lawrence. "Why don't you eat in the main break room? They've got cold filtered water up there." Lawrence replied, voice unchanged. "I'm used to being placed in the sub-level." The boy froze. "Where are you from anyway?" "A place that believed there shouldn't be a main or a sub-level." That sentence shut him up. He didn't ask anything else. But from that day on, he never tossed his lunch on the table again. Afternoon. Clean Zone began transitioning into internal inspection mode ahead of the weekly report. Cameras were turned on throughout the floor. Supervisors inside the control room scanned every hallway, every individual. A female employee, her name was Ramira, was summoned simply because she took more than 4 minutes in the restroom. She stood silently before her supervisor, eyes downcast. The supervisor, Bryce, spoke in a low, dull voice, not loud, but laced with menace. "Do you realize that 4 minutes means 3 packages went unscanned?" Ramira stammered, I had a stomachache." "Bryce, I don't care about your digestive system. I care about output." Then he wrote her up on the warning board and signed it. She walked away without daring to look back. Lawrence stood one hallway over, watching everything through the small glass panel in the door. He exhaled, quietly, but his grip tightened on the mop handle. In his mind, memories returned of the first time he had drafted the operational guidelines for Atlantic. The first line read, "Safety and dignity before speed." Now the very company he built was running in reverse. End of the day, Harper came over. "You been working here long?" Lawrence shook his head. "Do you ever feel like this place is suffocating? Not the air, but the way people live here, like they're being forced into a mold." Lawrence answered, "Because this place no longer sees people as people. It sees everyone as an equation." Harper sat beside him. "I once submitted a proposal to open a break room with natural light. Got ignored. I asked to increase inter-shift breaks to 5 minutes. Got dismissed. One time I taped up a Maya Angelou quote on the notice board. Got penalized for unauthorized content. I used to think I could change the system from within. Now, I'm not so sure." Lawrence looked at Harper. "Do you still remember people's names?" "Yes, I write them down. Everyone I've ever worked with. I note the first day I met them." Lawrence smiled softly. "Then you're still holding on to the one thing this system is slowly losing." Harper nodded. No need to ask what that thing was. Everyone knew. As Lawrence left, he paused in front of the surveillance control room. Through the glass, he saw Madison York, Regional Executive Director, laughing with an investor from New York. They pointed at KPI charts, laughed loudly, shook hands. Behind them, the surveillance screens displayed Clean Zone, where one employee had collapsed from exhaustion. Madison never turned around. Lawrence said nothing, but his gaze in that moment pierced through the glass, through the charts and glowing dashboards, and silently declared, "I see everything." Wednesday, 6:13 a.m. It was drizzling. The parking lot of Atlantic Field Terminal still glowed under rows of industrial LED lights, but the air remained thick with dampness. Lawrence entered Clean Zone through the south side entrance, the one only unofficial staff ever used. His shoes were soaked, the hems of his pants caked in mud, but his expression remained unchanged. He never bowed his head lower than necessary, even now when the entire system only saw him as a temporary shadow. Today's schedule was printed in bold, "Freight Elevator." Next to it, a handwritten note in red ink, still fresh, "Don't wet the floor." No name, but the pen stroke was sharp, almost like a command. The A-level freight elevator was located behind the technical hallway, leading from the delivery floor down to cold storage. It was mostly used by low-tier employees, also the kind of place where internal cameras often lost signal or ignored things, because here no one cared. As Lawrence was cleaning the steel floor near the elevator doors, a faint sound came from inside the cabin. He stopped, listened. It wasn't mechanical, it was human. He pressed his ear against the door. Clearly a female voice, breathing hard, Not screaming, not crying for help, just rapid breathing. He immediately pressed the exterior control panel. No response. An error message flashed. Level 2, signal error, stuck between technical floors. Lawrence turned and walked away silently, but not to abandon her. 10 minutes later, he returned with a screwdriver, a thin wire, and a small flashlight tucked in his jacket pocket. No one noticed, because no one paid attention to a janitor carrying tools, 3 minutes working beneath the utility panel. He unlocked the emergency release. The elevator doors cracked open less than a hand's width, but just enough for a face to appear. A young woman wearing an Atlantic uniform, pale, sweat lining her forehead, and her eyes puffy and red. She said nothing, just looked at him. Lawrence nodded. "Give me 3 more minutes. I'll get it open wider." She nodded back, very slightly. When the doors opened wide enough for her to slip through, she didn't rush, as if her body hadn't yet accepted that she could leave. She stood facing him, then bowed her head. "I'm sorry. I wasn't authorized to use this elevator, but I didn't have a choice." Lawrence didn't ask, but she continued. "They cut my shift yesterday, made me work the night one. I don't have a car. I slept in the maintenance room. This morning I went in to get my stuff and got stuck in the elevator. I don't have a tech badge, so I couldn't call anyone. I thought, if no one opened it, I'd just stay in there." He only replied, "What's your name?" "I'm Sophie." No one should get stuck just because they're looking for a place to rest. She looked at him, a flicker of doubt in her eyes, like she couldn't believe a janitor would use the phrase, "get stuck," in more than just the physical sense. They left the elevator without saying anything else. But Lawrence had seen enough. In Sophie's eyes was resignation, not rebellion, not resistance, but the kind of damage that's long gotten used to being silenced. That afternoon, Harper found Lawrence in the sub-level utility room. "They still haven't fixed the elevator." Lawrence nodded. Harper glanced around, then asked, "Yesterday, did you see Sophie?" "Yes. She's the reason I didn't quit earlier this year. When I got transferred from the training department down to clean zone, everyone avoided me like I was contagious. Only she quietly left a sandwich box on my desk. No name on it, but I knew it was her, because only she knew I hadn't eaten that day." Lawrence didn't respond, but his expression softened. Harper noticed. "You know, sometimes I think this place doesn't knock you out with a punch. It erases you, little by little." They walked together past hallway B4. Today was the scheduled technical inspection. Supervisors lined up, calling roll. When Sophie stepped up, Manager Bryce asked, "Do you have a report for your absence at 6:30 this morning?" "I was stuck in the elevator." "Do you have a written statement?" "No, sir." "Any witnesses?" Sophie glanced at Lawrence, but said nothing. Bryce shook his head. "Then your trust score will be deducted this week. Next time, follow proper procedure." No one objected. Sophie lowered her head, walked away silently. Lawrence stood still. He didn't defend her, didn't speak, but he recorded it in his notebook. A new page. First line, "Absent due to entrapment. No one asked why." When Harper heard the story, he clenched his jaw. This place prefers people who don't have reasons. Anyone who lives with a reason is considered a problem. Lawrence replied, "Then hold on to your reason, and don't let it be worn away." At the end of the day, while Lawrence was mopping the corridor that led to the technical wing, he saw Sophie restocking toilet paper in a small storage room. One roll dropped to the floor. She didn't bend to pick it up right away. She just stood there, for a long moment, as if asking herself, "Who am I picking this up for?" Lawrence passed by, bent down, picked it up for her. Said nothing, but this time she spoke. "Do they ever remember your name?" "No." "Then why do you still call everyone else by theirs?" "Because if we don't call them by name, they really will disappear." Night fell. Lawrence wrote in his notebook, Harper, Sophie, Bryce, Damien, Katya, Madison. They all exist, but not all of them are seen. Friday, 8:22 a.m. Last night's rain left a thick layer of condensation on the windshields of every car in the lot. Lawrence didn't wipe his windshield before driving. He knew every turn leading into the operation zone by heart. His dark-soled soft shoes left faint, even blotches on the coarse tile floor. a trace of someone who showed up every day, yet was never remembered. Inside the main office, printers hummed at full capacity, stacks of documents piled high, and emergency meetings were being prepped. Today was the scheduled walkthrough, a periodic inspection involving representatives from the investment board. The executive team was cleaning, polishing everything, overlaying TV screens with sleek KPI slides, and assembling logistics models like miniature command centers. Employees were instructed to wear fresh uniforms, remove all personal notes, and, as the internal notice explicitly stated, temporarily limit the presence of unrelated departments. Lawrence entered corridor D4 right on schedule. Today he'd been assigned to clean the main lobby, the kind of space no one noticed on a normal day, but which now served as the entryway for investors heading into the observation area. He said nothing, simply prepped his tools and began wiping the hallway glass and the glossy black tiles that mirrored the ceiling lights. A task like any other day, but today his very existence had become inconvenient. 9:17 a.m. The guests began to arrive. Among them were three people: a female marketing executive from New York, an independent investor from California, and Madison York, the regional executive director. They strolled casually, eyes scanning every detail along the hallway. And then they stopped. Not because of the logistics models or the charts on the walls, but because of Lawrence, standing on a small ladder, cleaning the top window panels above the entrance. Madison strode forward, her heels stopping 3 steps from the ladder. Her voice wasn't loud, but carried clear authority. "Who is this?" A nearby assistant stammered. "That's the janitor. He's new." Madison frowned. "Why is he here?" "We specifically instructed that this area needs to be cleared for walkthrough." The assistant mumbled, I thought he'd be done before." Madison cut her off. "Get him down, now." Lawrence was just finishing the far corner of the window. He heard every word, but he didn't stop, not out of defiance, but because he was too used to being ranked behind every other priority. Madison, visibly irritated, stepped closer, looking up and speaking directly to him. "Excuse me, sir. This is a high-priority event. You need to clear this area immediately. You're obstructing visibility." Lawrence paused. Not too fast, not too slow. He turned around. His gaze wasn't confrontational, but neither did he lower it. He simply said, "It'll take me less than a minute to finish this." Madison looked at him as if he had just violated some sacred protocol. "We are presenting to potential investors. You are just a janitor. Step aside." That sentence dropped like a velvet-tipped arrow, not loud but steeped in arrogance. "You are just a janitor." A nearby employee, Harper, heard it. He froze. His hand clenched tightly around the clipboard clasp. He looked at Lawrence and saw him still standing there, squeegee in hand, not stepping down, but also not retaliating. The air in the hallway thinned. One of the investors turned to Madison, eyebrows raised. "That was unnecessary, wasn't it?" Madison gave a soft, strained smile. "We value discipline. Order matters here." Lawrence stepped down. He didn't argue, didn't react. But in his eyes there was an unusual glint. Not resignation, not anger, but recognition. Recognition that what he had long suspected was now undeniably clear. This system, the one he once built on ideals, no longer respected anyone without a badge that said position. Following the incident, Madison ordered all associated personnel to re-sign the area protocol. Harper was summoned for standing too close to a restricted area without authorization. He didn't object, just signed, then quietly returned to the stockroom. But that afternoon, when he saw Lawrence mopping the rear hallway, he walked over. "Why didn't you say anything?" "I did." "No, you didn't react. You didn't defend yourself." Lawrence smiled faintly. "Sometimes saying something when people aren't ready to listen isn't courage. It's a waste." Harper bit his lip. "But they humiliated you," Lawrence replied, voice steady. "You think they humiliated me, but really they just revealed what they value." That night, Lawrence wrote in his notebook, "Today they said, he's just a janitor. Tomorrow I'll let them say it again. Let's see if they'll still dare, when they can no longer see me the way they did today." Monday, 5:59 a.m. Lawrence arrived earlier than everyone else. He stood outside the internal data processing room, a door with no nameplate, no glass panel, only a small electronic control panel mounted on the wall, and two cameras positioned at diagonal angles. The stainless steel door, usually locked for non-authorized personnel, was slightly ajar this morning, as a technician had just exited. Lawrence didn't enter. He simply glanced inside, where a cold blue light radiated from a large screen, and the rhythmic tapping of keys sounded like a mechanical heartbeat. Under that light, everything in the room looked sterile, lifeless, and unnaturally clean. He turned away without a word, but mentally recorded the door mechanism, the camera angles, the equipment number tags, and the loosely pinned access hierarchy posted on the wall. 7:04 a.m. Lawrence was assigned to clean the overflow storage zone, where unprocessed stock was temporarily stacked. It was a rarely visited area, but very close to the IT room in the legacy data archive. While mopping the floor near shelf B14, a folder fell from the rack. Pages were filled with dense code lines, graphs, time logs. The top page read in bold, "Shifty data redundancy, reconcile file." Lawrence picked it up, flipped through a few pages. He stopped at a table showing shift totals versus actual output. Shift count, 11. Output, 3,204 orders. But in the digital file he had glimpsed in the surveillance room the previous week, for that same date, it showed 13 shifts, 4,788 orders, a discrepancy too large to be called a data entry error. 9:32 a.m. In the technical wing, Lawrence ran into the same young technician from before, the one he had helped clean up a broken shipment box. The boy lowered his head slightly and hesitated. "Sir, were you someone who used to work in software?" Lawrence raised an eyebrow. The boy fumbled. "I saw you fix that error scanner the other day." "Only someone who knows the old error language would know how to reset a frozen RFID tag like that. Regular folks wouldn't know how." Lawrence replied slowly, "Do you read the daily log files?" The boy nodded. "Mandatory. But why? Have you ever wondered if that file is accurate?" The boy stiffened, then lowered his voice. I once saw the original file looked different from the one that got submitted, but every time someone asked about it, they got reassigned." Lawrence looked directly at him. "And you stayed?" "Because I need the job. My mom's going through chemo." Lawrence nodded, not with pity, but understanding. He didn't advise, didn't console. He knew no one needs advice when they're just trying to survive. At noon, Lawrence slipped into the old archive room. He didn't need to break the lock, just used an old key card he had reprogrammed with a universal stripe, one he once used 2 decades ago when Atlantic was still expanding. The door opened. Inside were hundreds of document boxes. He searched the section indexed before full digitization, originals printed from the legacy management system he himself had once designed. Every symbol, every line of code still intact. He began cross-referencing weeks, departments, product codes, and slowly a pattern emerged. All the data sent to the audit board had been sanitized, in the literal sense. Error rates mysteriously vanished. Staff turnover was rewritten as voluntary resignation. Internal warnings from the technical team, disregarded without explanation. Right then, he heard footsteps. Lawrence closed the file, stepped back into the dark behind the shelving. The person entering was Madison York, accompanied by a mid-level employee. She held a file, handing it over. "Reprint this. Remove the other file. We need it to match the IPO week numbers. Don't let anyone dig up the originals." The other nodded, took the folder, and left. Madison lingered a few seconds. Her eyes scanned the room like a predator. Then she walked out. Lawrence exhaled slowly, not from worry, but confirmation. Manipulation was no longer a suspicion. It was a directive. And worse than that, no one thought it was wrong. That afternoon, Harper stopped by the tech wing and saw Lawrence wiping down the stainless wall behind the order check scanner. Harper glanced around, then asked, "Have you ever heard of something called the Ghost database?" Lawrence subtly furrowed his brow. Harper continued, "It's a backup data set the system used to keep for validation before scrubbing errors. But recently it's been locked. No one has access anymore. Only a few people on the upper executive team. Lawrence didn't respond, but after Harper left, he jotted into his notebook. If the ghost file still exists, then the truth hasn't been erased. End of day. After everyone had left, Lawrence returned to the old data wing, following a watermark code embedded in one of the backup documents. He found a secondary server mislocated on the system map, as if intentionally placed where no one would think to look. He didn't access it. He no longer had clearance. But he knew what he needed wasn't in viewing the data. It was in proving it once existed. Back in his room, seated in dim light, he wrote, "Data is the backbone of a system, but if the data is manipulated, then all company values are nothing more than blistered skin on an infected body." Wednesday, 7:08 a.m. Fog clouded the third-floor windows of the central archive wing. Above, the LED ceiling lights dimmed with each second of the shift change. The entire building seemed to be breathing slower. But for Lawrence, this wasn't just another Wednesday morning. Today, he wasn't starting with a mop or a bucket. He was starting with memory. Same familiar footsteps through corridor B4. Same musty-smelling archive of old paper. Same stainless steel door whose lock grooves and scratches he had quietly memorized. But this time, he wasn't looking for productivity records. He was looking for a name. The top shelf in the far left corner housed old personnel files, sorted by region code and year of employment. Lawrence reached up, pulled out a faded box labeled Atlantic Employee HR-NW-2016-2019. He knew what he was searching for, but he didn't know what he would feel once he found it. The first folder listed employees who resigned for personal reasons. He flipped through each page. Every name a life story. Mother sick, returned home, unable to handle workplace stress, left job voluntarily after reassignment. But there was no name Ethan Vane. The second folder covered disciplinary actions. Still no sign of the name. Then came the third, thicker, labeled Records Flagged, Unindexed. Lawrence frowned. Unindexed was an internal Atlantic code, used to mark cases stripped from automated access, excluded from official reports, and never forwarded to legal. In other words, erased. Page 12. The line read, Ethan V. NW OPS flagged March 12, 2018. Reason, internal disruption, unaligned with efficiency policy. Note, access permanently revoked. Do not reinstate. Lawrence didn't flinch, didn't tremble, but his eyes could no longer hold their usual calm. Beneath the line, do not reinstate, was a red ink note slashed diagonally. Spoke against Madison York, escalated to Jonathan D. Final. Jonathan D., the very CEO who succeeded Lawrence after he sold the majority of his shares and stepped back into the shadows. Madison York had just been appointed at the time. Ethan, his son, had been head of regional operations, known for his stance. Efficiency should never come at the cost of humanity. And now he was labeled internal disruptor, erased and permanently removed from a system his father had once helped create. Lawrence sat down on an old wooden stool, eyes fixed on the smudged ink. Not blurred by time, but by water. The file had once been wet, maybe by accident, maybe on purpose. But that no longer mattered. What mattered was this. His son had spoken out and been crushed by a system Lawrence once believed would protect what was right. That afternoon, when Harper dropped by the tech room, Lawrence was mopping under the control desk. Harper sat down, took a sip from his water bottle. "I once heard about someone named Ethan. He was my cousin's former supervisor. People used to call him the guy who went upstream without making enemies. One time he opposed the policy cutting vacation time, and they reassigned him. After that, no one ever heard from him again. No one knew where he went, like he never existed." Lawrence paused, then replied slowly, "Sometimes people don't disappear. The system just refuses to admit they ever existed." Harper fell silent, then asked, "Was he someone close to you?" "Closer than you think." Later that afternoon, Lawrence quietly stepped into the auxiliary storage room, where the young night shift technician usually worked. The boy had just finished a routine camera check when Lawrence asked, "Do you still keep old log files?" "I do, but they're locked under executive code. Can you show me the list of employees who were removed from the system in the last 5 years? The boy hesitated. I'd get penalized if anyone finds out. Lawrence replied, I don't need the full data. Just a name. One name. The boy nodded. A few minutes later, he returned with a sheet of A4 paper, handwritten, EV, employee ID 31188, data erased 03-2018. Lawrence took the page, said nothing. He folded it gently and placed it in his notebook. As he stepped out of the storage room, the rain began to fall. That night, he wrote in his notebook, My son walked away from the system I once believed in, not because he failed, but because he couldn't accept success built on the fear of others. That system erased his name, but I still have it, in my hand, in my memory, in the reason I came back. Then he turned to a new page. The first line read, Tomorrow I'll be assigned to clean the corridor outside the executive office, and I will let my mop hear everything they think someone like me doesn't understand. Thursday, 5:45 a.m. Lawrence started his shift earlier than usual. No one assigned him a task. There was no official work schedule. But he knew exactly what he had to do. Mop the hallway leading to the third-floor executive offices. This area was rarely, if ever, assigned to janitorial staff. Not because it was too clean, but because it was considered not in need of cleaning. The glass doors were spotless, the leather chairs pristine, the automatic coffee machines gleamed, and the slogans on the wall looked like they'd been written by people who'd never set foot in the loading dock downstairs. Lawrence pushed his cart into the corridor just as Madison York stepped out of an internal meeting room. She paused when she saw him, her eyes flicking to the duty roster posted behind him, then down at his water bucket. You're not supposed to be here today. Lawrence didn't look directly at her. The hallway was marked for maintenance detail this morning. His voice was calm, not confrontational. Madison didn't press the issue, but she looked at him like someone eyeing a riddle that refused to solve itself. Something about him made her uneasy, and that was precisely what made her walk away faster. 9:12 a.m. Third-floor surveillance hallway. Lawrence paused at an empty stretch of corridor, gently lifted the cloth draped over his supply cart, revealing a small circuit board, an improvised device he had rebuilt from discarded parts in the broken equipment stockroom, a vibration sensor module, a signal routing board, and a temporary access port wired through the legacy internal system. He installed it neatly beneath the water dispenser panel, somewhere no one would ever think to look, then adjusted his mop and resumed work as usual. 10:27 a.m. Harper crossed paths with him near the tech wing, greeting him with a glance. He said nothing aloud, but in his hand was an old sheet of paper, a printed training document from 2016. At the bottom, scribbled in pen, was a tiny annotation. System shell, override line, LV0117-J-R. Lawrence took it without a word. Harper murmured softly, Found it in a pile of old training files. Might be useless, but I think some old things still work. Like you. Lawrence didn't smile, but he nodded. For the first time, it wasn't a nod to information, but to trust. That afternoon, Lawrence returned to the sub-level break room, where the outdated internal desktop was still used to update the daily task roster. Everyone thought the machine was obsolete, slow, clunky, unable to connect to the mainframe. But what they didn't know was this. That exact machine ran an old version of the system shell, and Lawrence had written the first line of code for it. He typed slowly, Makefile Sao Chepchin Sua Logan, Ghost Root Pass. Shell, init addle, vein, legacy, ghost shell. A message appeared, access detected, read mode. Only Lawrence didn't alter any data, didn't breach any barriers. He only observed, monitored the data streams no one else ever saw. He located the deletion protocol that auto-erased employee names, along with the IP addresses that executed the command. All of them traced back to Madison York's office. He found the ghost log Harper had mentioned, the one rumored to be locked, still alive inside a hidden directory, invisible to the system map. This file recorded all internal alterations before official reports were generated. Actual work hours, vacation leave discrepancies, lists of employees who had been forced out, but labeled as voluntary departures. Within 3 hours, Lawrence had backed up the entire log using a real-time checksum method. No downloads needed, just verification strings recorded. No one knew what he had done. No system flagged him, because he was the one who had once written that system. 7:03 p.m. When everyone had left, Lawrence sat alone in the lower-level break room. No one was working anymore, just the hum of the wall fan and the dim light of the corridor. He placed his notebook on the table and wrote a short line. "I don't need power to change the system. I just need to remember how it once worked, when it was still right." Below that, he added, "Mopping the floor is surface level. What I came back to clean is the system." At the bottom edge of the page, he taped a small slip of paper, the override code Harper had given him. He drew a single line through it, marking, "Activate if necessary, but only when they believe no one is listening." Friday, 7:48 a.m. The air inside Atlantic Field Terminal was thick, as if the building itself was holding its breath. Madison York had just returned from a confidential meeting with the operations director, her expression more severe than usual. In her hand was a thin folder clipped with a red plastic tag, the kind only used when preparing for disciplinary action or termination. Across the hallway, Harper was still working at the order verification desk, unaware that minutes later, his name would be read aloud in front of the entire room, and no one would dare look up. The internal investigation had started from a minor technical glitch, an unauthorized log file copy discovered on the old sublevel computer. No one knew its exact origin. No one had clear evidence. But because Harper was the only one who regularly accessed the outdated equipment, and because he had mentioned data inconsistencies in an internal email 3 weeks prior, it was enough to become a conviction. 9:02 a.m. Harper was summoned to the internal executive room. Lawrence was mopping the hallway nearby. He saw Harper walk past him without making eye contact, his hand clenched tightly. Lawrence knew it was time. Inside the room, Madison sat upright at the conference table. Beside her were the head of HR and an in-house legal representative. Harper entered. "Sit down." Madison didn't wait for him to respond. "You've been accessing unauthorized files. You've been seen interacting with legacy systems beyond your assigned duties, and you've breached the information security policy." Harper didn't lower his head. "I only looked. I never changed anything." Madison leaned back. "Intent is not relevant. Action is a sheet of paper was placed on the table. This is your termination notice, effective immediately." Harper said nothing. Didn't stand. Didn't protest. He only asked, "Why me?" Madison gave a thin smile. "Because no one else was reckless enough to think the system wouldn't notice." Harper left the room in silence. Lawrence was still mopping the hallway. As Harper passed, he stopped. "They fired me." Lawrence set the mop down. "Why?" Harper laughed, a hollow laugh. "Because I asked questions." Lawrence didn't say anything, just nodded. Harper continued. "They said I accessed data I shouldn't have. But what I really did was try to understand what they've been hiding." He paused. "I don't regret it, but I hate that I didn't finish what I started." Lawrence looked at him. His voice dropped, no longer that of a janitor, but of a father who had once lost a son for doing the right thing at the wrong time. "You planted something. Even if they try to burn the soil, the seed remembers where it fell." Harper gave a small nod. He pulled a folded slip of paper from his shirt pocket and placed it on Lawrence's cart. "This is the last thing I found, before they cut me off. It may be useful, or not, but I wanted you to have it." Then he left. No glance back, no goodbye, no farewell. But Lawrence knew that was the way someone walks out standing tall, not falling down. The paper contained a system code, a special string, FTL-ROOT-PATH/ATL _CORE_GHOST /88-LOCKED, an access code to Atlantic's legacy core, supposedly shut down in 2019 after a security overhaul. That afternoon, Lawrence was reassigned to clean in the lower-level operations wing, a dim hallway far from the management offices. He didn't object. On the contrary, he used the time to reactivate the old access device he had once hidden beneath the third-floor water dispenser. He entered the code Harper gave him. A command line appeared. Shell access, legacy core, reinstated. The system didn't lock. No alarms were triggered, because it didn't think anyone remembered it. But Lawrence hadn't forgotten. He watched the data stream flow through each segment. At one point, he saw Harper's name tagged with the label, unstable, non-compliant. The reason, accessed internal ethics log without clearance. Below that, a line highlighted in red, subject flagged for removal, retention risk. Lawrence stared at those last two words, retention risk, not because of performance, not because of behavior, but because he was someone hard to keep when he still held on to truth. He recorded the code and added it to his notebook. In the same notebook, beneath the page where his son's name had once been erased, there was now another. Harper W., deleted June 14th. Reason, incompatible with system. Lawrence closed the notebook, tucked it into his jacket pocket. On his way out of the tech wing, he paused at the storage room door. No one was inside, but he looked directly at his reflection in the glass, as if seeing Harper one last time. Then he whispered, "They think you're a loss, but really, you're the evidence." He turned and walked away, not knowing that behind the door, the young technician, the one he had once quietly helped, had overheard everything, and tears were falling down silently. Monday, 10:58 a.m. Atlantic Field Terminal looked like it was wearing a polished mask. The reception desks had new carpets. The glass doors had been cleaned twice just that morning, and the executive elevators were programmed for exclusive use from 9 a.m. until noon. Today was a milestone, the final high-level meeting before the company officially launched its IPO. In over 20 years of operation, Atlantic had never come this close to going public. A potential valuation had been proposed, a list of pre-approved investors finalized, and the media prepared to broadcast the announcement. But one thing remained unspoken. Beneath the glossy exterior was a structure rotting from the core, and the only person who saw it clearly was walking into the boardroom wearing shoes no one had ever bothered to clean. Lawrence pushed his supply cart into the boardroom 20 minutes before the meeting started. He wore Atlantic's janitor uniform, light gray shirt, name tag so faded it was nearly blank, and an old baseball cap pulled low over his forehead. In his hand, the mop, custom adjusted with a padded grip, not for comfort, but to conceal a signal tracking device that recorded all internal network commands on the third floor. He stepped into the room where the company's greatest power was distributed daily, where signatures sealed the fate of thousands of workers, though none of those seated had ever walked the warehouse floor. No one noticed him. No one stopped him. Because in this place, a janitor was part of the backdrop, too insignificant to be seen. The room was cold. Thermostat set to 68 degrees Fahrenheit. An 8-meter glass table dominated the center, flanked by two oversized LED screens displaying the slide, Atlantic IPO Readiness, Week 8 Update. On the screen, 98.7% fulfillment efficiency, employee retention plus 12%, incident-free days, 45. Lawrence slowly wiped the table's edges, his eyes scanning the pre-printed documents laid neatly across the front seats. He didn't touch them, but memorized every chart, every number smoothed into curves like silk. He knew what was behind those numbers: deleted complaints, unlogged night shifts, workers pushed out simply for asking questions, and now all of it was about to be packaged as success for the investors. 11 o'clock. The executive team filed in. Madison York took the center seat. Katya from HR sat to her left. Damien from tech on the right. Jonathan D., the current CEO, stood at the head of the table. Legal counsel, financial advisors, and two media representatives were also present. No one asked about Harper. No one mentioned that one of their most seasoned employees had been fired just a week ago. The meeting agenda didn't list special personnel. It listed just 4 bold words: final stakeholder summary. Lawrence stepped back into a corner after finishing his cleaning. He didn't leave the room. No one told him to. They simply assumed he'd know his place on the outside. And that was their first mistake. Madison opened the meeting with a polished tone. "We've come a long way. 8 weeks of IPO prep, and today we can confidently say, Atlantic is ready. I'll begin with our final update. The slides shifted to growth charts. First line, trust accelerates speed. Speed delivers results. Madison read off each stat, retention up, on-time delivery rates peaking, delayed zones, successfully restructured. No one asked for details. No one cross-checked. They just nodded at the numbers. Damien presented next. The tech systems are fully synchronized. We've eliminated 100% of duplicate reporting bugs. The old ghost log has been replaced with Recheck 2.1. All current data is ready for release. A lawyer whispered, "Any issues with personnel data?" Katya responded, "We've filtered all incomplete records. All current staff meet disclosure standards. No one has any history that could harm company optics." Lawrence stood still, but in his mind was a list of dozens who'd been filtered: Harper, Sophie, Ethan, his son, and others he never even had time to learn the names of, forced out for being too tired, too slow, too real. Jonathan stood. His voice was clear, almost enthusiastic. "We've done what no one thought a logistics firm could. Turned an operational system into an investable, scalable, and trusted platform. I'm proud of this team. The IPO isn't just a milestone. It's proof that Atlantic is the present and the future." The room clapped, not loud, but in sync, like a ritual. Lawrence stepped to the far corner of the room, adjusted his mop handle, pretending to leave. But really, he was activating the device one last time to record the meeting. He didn't need to speak, didn't need to present. He just needed to remember. Because he knew, tomorrow when he spoke up, there would be no argument. He would simply present the truth. And the truth doesn't need to shout. As the meeting ended, everyone exited with their packets in hand, eyes fixed on the bright horizon. No one looked back at him. No one knew he had gathered everything he needed. No one questioned why a janitor was still standing there after 2 full hours, watching every slide without blinking. Lawrence slowly collected his mop and bucket, stepped out of the boardroom, and left behind a single mark, a slightly unfolded cleaning towel neatly placed at the center of the table, right where Madison had been sitting. On the cloth was a faint streak of red ink, the same shade as the pen Madison always used to adjust the numbers. Tuesday, 11:58 a.m. The central boardroom on the 3rd floor of Atlantic Field Terminal lit up once again. The atmosphere was just like the day before, a repeated ritual. Madison sat at the head of the table. Jonathan stood near the digital display, and the advisors beside them were so familiar with the routine, they could probably guess the meeting's content just by the slide title. But today, there were no slides. Today, Jonathan said only one sentence. "Before we submit the final filing to the market, I want everyone to review everything one last time. Nothing is to be left behind." It sounded like a statement of principle, but in truth, it was a perfectly crafted veil for a last-minute cleanup. No leaks, no anomalies, no one left behind who might ruin the well-constructed show. Papers were passed around, all eyes fixed on signatures. No one noticed the janitor standing in the corner of the room, still in the same worn uniform, still in the same waterlogged shoes. But today, that man no longer held a mop. Lawrence didn't look at the screen. He looked at the people, each face that once never looked at him as he scrubbed stains beneath their feet. Each glance that once silently said, "He's just a janitor," without needing to say it aloud. And now they sat here speaking about this company as if it were a product of their own making, as if Atlantic hadn't been built by the calloused hands of hundreds whose names had been erased from the system. He no longer carried a notebook, no more recording device. Today he brought only a small folded piece of paper in his shirt pocket. And just as Jonathan said, "If there are no further concerns, we'll end here," Lawrence stepped toward the head of the table. No one stopped him. No one believed he had any reason to speak. They thought he was going to remind someone to lift their foot so he could mop another corner of the carpet. But he didn't bow. He didn't grip a mop. He didn't say, "Excuse me." He simply looked Madison in the eye. And just as she began to ask, "What are you doing?" Lawrence placed a small sheet of paper beside the IPO folder and slowly removed his cap. A silence followed, seemingly meaningless. But every person in the room, though no one said a word, had stopped breathing. Madison's face turned pale. Jonathan froze like a statue. Katya slid her chair back. Damien dropped his pen, because the man who had just placed that paper on the table was a name they'd heard before, on the company's founding timeline, in old news clips about Atlantic's early days. Lawrence Vane, the founder, the man who once sold his shares and vanished, the man they had assumed was dead, or at least no longer cared, and now he stood there needing no introduction, no declaration. Just standing was enough to collapse the entire illusion they had built. Madison spoke, barely audible. "You are?" Lawrence cut in, calm. "I'm the man you all forgot, but this company didn't." He turned to Jonathan. "I've heard enough, I've read enough, and I've recorded enough. Every altered data entry, every name erased, every voice ignored. I didn't come here to reclaim my name. I came to ask you this. When you place the word trust at the top of your report, do you even know what it means?" No one answered. No one could. Jonathan tried to stay composed. "Mr. Vane, if you have concerns, we can discuss them privately." Lawrence nodded. "I agree, but the problem is, this company doesn't need another private discussion. It needs a collective memory." He pulled the small folded paper from his pocket. It was the unsigned termination notice of Ethan Vane from 2018, never officially released. On it was a handwritten note from Madison, in red ink. Not to return, not to be mentioned. Lawrence placed the paper squarely on top of the IPO documents. "If you intend to call this a truthful record, then I suggest you sign this page as well." Jonathan went still. Damien looked at the floor. Katya turned her head. Madison tried to interject, but Lawrence spoke first. "I don't want to derail the IPO. I don't want to damage the company. I only want what this company once had and lost. A system that listened to real people." He turned toward the door. "I won't stay in this room much longer, but I will leave behind a name, not mine, the name of everyone you've left behind. You can call them obsolete, errors in the system, whatever you want, but they are the foundation. And without a foundation, this house will collapse. Not because of me, but because of you." He walked out. Didn't wait for a response. Didn't look back. As the door closed behind him, no one in the room had yet recovered. No rebuttal, no mocking laughter. Just the silent crumbling of something they once believed was solid. Left in the boardroom, only Madison remained, holding the piece of paper. Her hand trembled, as if, for the first time in years, she realized she had just been defeated. Not by power, not by legal argument, but by a man she never thought could stand. Wednesday, 9:03 a.m. No one received a meeting invite. No calendar entry appeared in the system. No announcement from internal communications. But everyone knew something was going to happen today. The entire third floor was restricted within 5 minutes of Lawrence arriving, accompanied by an independent advisory group he had personally selected. Not from the current executive board, but from the original founding circle, people who had built Atlantic with him in the early days and now served as operations consultants for global logistics firms. No one from the current leadership objected to his presence. No one dared, because after his stand 2 days earlier, Jonathan had been forced to issue a formal indefinite suspension of the IPO to reassess internal data and structural integrity, a diplomatic phrasing for a critical retreat. Madison York was not present. She had been suspended the morning after the meeting by a short written order from Jonathan himself, the same man she once saw as an ally, now forced to sacrifice her to preserve what was left of the system. The letter didn't specify the details, but the subject line, "Pending internal ethics review," was enough for everyone to understand. She had been removed. No more voice, no more control, no more shield. Damien and Katya were still there, seated at the far end of the table, quieter than usual. They didn't know what was coming, but for the first time in months they weren't in control. They were waiting. Lawrence sat at the head of the table. He didn't stand. No slides. In front of him was a notebook, not a laptop, no digital notes. Just the original. A journal where he had written down every word, every name, every moment Atlantic began to distort. He opened it, slowly flipping to the last page. There in red ink was a single line. Rebuilding doesn't begin with a declaration. It begins with removing what's most artificial. He looked around the room and spoke with calm clarity. I don't have a speech. I don't need to read a reform statement. I have three things to announce. 1. The IPO is postponed indefinitely. 2. An independent oversight board will begin operating today, outside the authority of the current CEO or any VP. 3. I will rejoin the system, not as CEO, but as a restructuring sponsor. No title, no shares. Jonathan nodded. No objection. Perhaps within him was a quiet relief that someone else would now carry the weight. Damien looked like he wanted to say something, but only exhaled, as if his words no longer belonged in this new rhythm of the room. Lawrence placed his hand on a thin file. Each page contained a name that had once been erased from the system, from Sophie, the girl trapped in the elevator, to Harper, dismissed for speaking the truth, and Ethan, his son, whose name had never once been mentioned again within the company. He said, I'm not bringing them back to fix Atlantic. I'm bringing them back to remind Atlantic that this company was never built on metrics alone. It was built by people who knew how to think beyond themselves. No one clapped, but no one objected. Katya gave a quiet nod, for the first time that morning. Damien stared at the table, but didn't scowl like he used to. Their silence wasn't obedience, it was acknowledgement. There was no denying it anymore. Lawrence continued, Harper will return, not as a staff member, but as head of people culture. That title has never existed at Atlantic, but from now on it will be a role equal in weight to any operations director. Sophie will lead the internal listening unit, responsible for collecting and publishing employee feedback. And Ethan, though he doesn't want to return, will be formally credited as the creator of the internal risk control framework Atlantic uses today, even though his name was never acknowledged. One of the independent advisors nodded. They had witnessed the model's creation and knew the removal of Ethan's name was a political choice, not a technical one. Lawrence didn't hide his emotions, but he also didn't let them lead. His voice remained steady. I'm not here to prosecute anyone. I'm here to make sure this doesn't happen again. Starting today, all data reports will have a neutral backup copy, managed by the independent audit group. All termination decisions will require verification by 3 levels: department leadership, employee representation, and internal ethics oversight. And no one, including me, will have the authority to erase a person's name from the Atlantic system without going through that triple verification process. Jonathan turned and asked softly, Do you think this will save Atlantic? Lawrence replied, I'm not trying to save Atlantic. I'm trying to make it worth saving. At the end of the meeting, Lawrence issued no press release. He simply wrote a line on the board. We don't rebuild trust with noise. We rebuild it by showing up. He handed the marker to Harper, who stepped up and wrote beneath it, and staying. 3 weeks after the IPO was postponed. Monday. No wind. A pale sunlight settled across the Atlantic building's glass facade like a thin coat of dust, just enough for someone to wipe clean. And this time, when the janitor approached, no one looked away. No one muttered, He's just the janitor. Because that very man, the one who had quietly wiped every door frame, every step, had become the reason behind every change they were now living. Not through a title, but through presence. Lawrence no longer showed up daily at Atlantic. He hadn't disappeared. He simply didn't need to be there anymore. Because the system had begun to run the right way. Not out of fear, but out of remembrance. Remembering what had once been forgotten. The third-floor boardroom had a new carpet. Not because it was fancier, but because Madison York had once stood on the old one during the IPO meeting. She was no longer CEO. The board never publicly stated the reason for her dismissal, but everyone internally understood. Lawrence didn't need her to be humiliated. He only needed her to sit down and step away. Damien had moved on to oversee data restructuring. Katya had returned to frontline recruiting, not posting templated job ads, but sitting down with each applicant, asking them the one question that had never appeared on any form. Why do you truly want to work at Atlantic? Harper worked from a small office beside the employee break room. No glass barrier, no gold-plated nameplate. His title was officially head of people culture, but he called it the living feedback room. Each day he spent 2 hours walking the warehouse floor, the loading bays, the packaging zone, not to monitor, but to listen. A young worker once whispered, "Before, coming here felt like fear. Now, it feels like walking into somewhere that's mine." Sophie now led a group called Echo, 5 former employees who had once been reassigned, removed, or ignored after offering feedback. Now they read every new suggestion, not to filter or flag, but to understand. Their job wasn't to judge right or wrong. It was to listen long enough that no one felt like they were shouting into a wall. One Friday morning, no announcement. Lawrence returned, not through the front doors, not in a CEO's coat. He wore his old baseball cap, the one now known throughout the company as the cap that made Atlantic stop and look at itself. He walked straight to the third-floor boardroom. No one stopped him, because by now everyone understood. If anyone still had the right to walk into that room without knocking, it was him. The room had changed. The whiteboard was replaced by a glass panel etched with the words, "You can't outsource dignity." On the wall hung a photo of the Echo team sitting together, not taken by a professional photographer, just a candid moment captured by a receptionist. In the corner of the room, a single glass frame. Inside it, Lawrence's old baseball cap. No name below it, just one line. "For the one who stood up, so we could sit right again." No one knew who had written the line. It could have been Harper, could have been Sophie, could have been any employee who once felt seen because Lawrence had reached down when they had fallen. But that didn't matter. What mattered was, it was there. Lawrence looked at the cap for a long time, then stepped forward, touched the glass. He said nothing. He didn't need to. A young manager entered a few seconds later, saw him, and instinctively started to step back, thinking Lawrence might need the room alone. But Lawrence turned and said quietly, "You can stay. Don't let stillness become something only reserved for those who've stepped away." The manager nodded, stood beside him. Neither said a word, but the silence was warm, not tense, not forced, just the quiet of a company breathing again, this time with the rhythm of people, not spreadsheets. That day there was no farewell party, no live stream titled "A Journey of Inspiration," no trending hashtag, but several employees placed a hand over their heart before entering the boardroom. A small act, spontaneous, like a greeting for someone who was once invisible, but had become the reason why this place was now worth showing up for. Some people change entire systems without raising their voice, without business cards, without a title, without anyone rising in applause, just by being there. Long enough, quiet enough, at the right moment. The dusty cap on the wall doesn't just remind us of one man. It reminds us of all the people who were once overlooked, underestimated, or dismissed simply because they didn't fit the mold. And yet they are the foundation of every place worth calling a workplace. If you've ever felt unseen, been treated as invisible, or witnessed injustice unfold in silence, this story is for you. And if you believe justice doesn't need to shout, that kindness should be the standard, not the exception. Then please, like this video to help the message keep spreading. Subscribe to the channel so you never miss another story that matters. And comment below, who is the dusty cap in your life? We want to hear your story. And don't forget to share this with someone who needs a reminder. You don't have to be loud to create change. You just have to stand up once at the right time.